Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Remote Work, Telehealth, and Healthcare's Future. Experts answer lingering questions. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few housekeeping instructions. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with the audio, try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We're here to help. With that, I am pleased to welcome today's speakers. Leah Gabbert, Senior Marketing Manager, Healthcare at Nutanix. Leah's tenured marketing and communications career has been dedicated to healthcare IT. She spent 11 years at Cerner Corporation leading global marketing and sales support teams. At Nutanix, Leah is focused on developing strategies and crafting thoughtful narrative to highlight healthcare use cases and promote customers' exciting successes. Karen Carl, Senior Manager, Clinical Informatics at Mednax. Karen is responsible for Mednax's clinical informatics system, including PACS. Her unique blend of skills culminate from 25 years of experience in clinical settings. Just prior to Mednax, Karen worked for Philips Medical Systems and Fujifilm Medical Systems. Tim Anderson, Director of Technical Services at Mednax. Tim, a 25-year information technology veteran, leads the Mednax IT infrastructure teams. During his tenure at Mednax, he has focused on IT transformation projects to simplify operations, improve scalability and resilience, provide secure remote access, and reduce operating costs. Prior to Mednax, Tim worked in a variety of IT roles focused on virtualization and solving remote connectivity challenges. Leah, Karen, and Tim, thank you so much for being here. And Leah, I'll turn the floor over to you now.
Thanks, Brian. Before we start our exciting story of Mednax's clinical imaging and end-user computing and telehealth successes, I wanted to spend just a few moments to introduce you to Nutanix. If you're not familiar with Nutanix, our platform was really started about 10 years ago, anchored in the hyperconverged infrastructure space. As you can see on this slide today, in the very center of this slide, you can see the digital hyperconverged infrastructure services. That's really the collapsing of the compute and storage and networking pieces. But today, our platform is so much more. As you can see, we've made sure to support additional services above and beyond this HCI. The data center services, including storage, business continuity, disaster recovery, our DevOps services, and even our desktop services. These are all services and platforms that are very critical to making sure that we're moving towards the future of healthcare. And the remote work and telehealth pieces all sit upon this platform in a very meaningful way. As I mentioned before, Nutanix is about 10 years old. We really started our successes in the HCI space, but we've grown to be so much more, and our platform is so much more now today as well. But I wanted to bring this slide to your attention to just focus on the upper right-hand corner for a moment. Our world-class NPS score has remained at 90 or above for the last 6 years. This is really important because it's a testament to how important our customers are to us. The average in the software industry is way below 90. And so this 90 NPS score is a testament to our successes in this space. So you might ask, where does Nutanix fit with healthcare applications? Well, the reality is that we start typically with the EHR space. So we work with Cerner and Epic and eClinicalWorks and Meditech, and we're absolutely ingrained with relationships with these EHR providers. In fact, we are the only HCI provider that is full stack certified with Meditech, and we're certified to run all of the other applications as well. When we talk about clinical imaging and PACS, you can see that we've got relationships and opportunities to be very ingrained with these companies as well. But we understand that you're probably running additional applications far above and beyond the EHR and clinical imaging as well. And the reality is that Nutanix is designed to run all of these applications. We understand that the healthcare ecosystem is very rich and diverse, and it's important to us that we've got relationships that span throughout this entire ecosystem. So you'll hear a little bit today about some of these partnerships that we have with Mednax and other vendors as well. But it's important to us to make sure that we are staying very ingrained and up to date with all of these vendors to make sure that support processes are in place and that we've got the right alliances in place to support you. And the reality is that Nutanix is committed to healthcare. We have dedicated healthcare sales and marketing teams. We've got dedicated engineering organizations that make sure that applications run very smoothly on Nutanix. We've got healthcare-specific support and escalation processes so that when you call in and you want support, you're speaking to somebody that understands healthcare. We've got dedicated healthcare alliance teams, and all of these teams are really there to make sure that we're understanding and talking your language as well. This is evident when you see that we've got growing adoption across over 1,500 global healthcare customers. These customers understand that healthcare is important to Nutanix, and we make sure that we take care of our customers, including Mednax, who we are very happy to introduce to you now and let them tell their exciting stories as well. Karen, take it away.
Thank you, Leah. I'm going to introduce or kick off a little bit about what Mednax is and how we came into this partnership, not only with me on the clinical informatics side, but with myself, with my own network or IT team, Tim Anderson. A little bit about who Mednax is. Founded, over 42 years ago by a physician, by a neonatologist. A lot of our growth has been by acquisition or even some organic growth, practices expanding upon where they are. Today we have about 15,000 employees in 500 offices across the United States and Puerto Rico. Those offices encompass, about half of those are in the NICU across the United States. We're the largest provider of neonatologist and NICU services. And the other half of that is in the office-based space. I'll get a little bit more into that in the next slide. At the core of everything, the focus of Mednax started and remains to be women and children. The women and children is that we're not really supporting women's health care from the ground up. We're focused on the maternal fetal space, which marries into the NICU practices. Truly high-risk pregnancies that our perinatologists are covering. And then from taking that high-risk pregnancy into, unfortunately, too many times, the NICU space, and from there, the focus has been on pediatrics. So a lot of our core is started in pediatric cardiology, and we're expanding now so that, NICU baby can go from, the NICU to whatever pediatric subspecialty they might need, from urology to neuro, to developmental peds, and even ophthalmology. So to date, with that, we do remain the nation's largest provider of maternal, fetal, newborn, and pediatric subspecialty services. All of that brings us to a pretty complicated PACS world. Being in clinical informatics for a while, we have the traditional, hospital-based enterprise PACS systems. Always hard to support are those more niche markets that we have. Number one, being office-based practices scattered throughout the United States. And number two, really highly specialized medicine. In this case, use case, I'm going to talk about the unique challenge that we had for maternal fetal medicine. We have 26 practices located currently in about 14 states, and those 26 practices encompass 83 main office locations, primary offices where they're staffed by a perinatologist and their supporting staff, including sonography. Those 26 practices also support over 75 outreach and telehealth locations. again, really bringing that unique challenge down to PACS and imaging, the outreach are truly underserved markets that we have clinicians getting on a corporate donated plane and flying for 4 hours with a sonographer and a portable ultrasound system to try to address, once a month, that underserved area. The telehealth locations, the same, where we might not have clinicians that actually go, feet on the street, supporting the store and forward of those more high-risk pregnancies to our physicians at the point of care. So that was one of our unique challenges, getting the images to the physician if they're traveling to outreach, and certainly the store forward, and making sure that wherever our clinicians are, they have access to our images. We support approximately 640 clinical users. Traditionally before Nutanix, we were installed with thick clients on 640 personal or Mednax devices. 200 of those are the MFMs or perinatologists, which is truly hard to find MFM resources. It's one of the specialties that is hard to find coverage where you need it. We have approximately 420 connected ultrasound systems, and to date we're generating, as you can see, about 400,000 studies a year, or billing for 1.2 million procedures. So a lot of activity trying to get from point of care to our solution. From there, I had this problem statement that, which each of those locations, I had 83 physical servers installed out there, and as well as the 600 plus thick client installed devices. In addition, I really could not provide a way for my physicians to remotely access. They had to literally be where their server was located. So I took my problem to Tim, director of our IT team, and from there, Tim, I'll let you say what we found out and the next journey that we started.
Thank you, Karen. I'll move to the next slide, which really kind of helps to sum it all up, and that's really the partnership between the PACS team and the IT team. As Karen did a great job of kind of illustrating the problem statement and what I will say is tech debt, she put a big challenge in my lap. I've been in the IT space for 25 plus years, but only in the medical space for maybe the last 4. So a lot of the terms that Karen was rattling off were new to me. I was in the data center space in our corporate office, in our corporate headquarters, and really the field space was different than the data center space. So going out and actually doing a site visit and seeing what one of our practices is like was very eye-opening for me. It's very traditional. These are sonogram machines connected to a server local in that practice. And imagine me, who's used to data center and everything virtual in a data center world, coming to a small practice with on-prem equipment. How do we keep that equipment up to date? How do we keep those servers up to date? How do we do hardware refreshes? In the data center world, that's easy. You virtualize it and you refresh and all of that. But in this world, it's different. So we really had to look at the use case. The vendor that we have, unfortunately, doesn't offer any type of web-based solutions. So we were kind of, our hands were tied to supporting it in a client server type mode. So the big pressing need was, like every healthcare organization out there, how do I provide, and Karen's big #1 thing is, how do I provide remote access to these doctors? So just to kind of paint a little picture for you, let's say that there's a practice or a site that has 5 offices, and the doctor may be in Office A on Monday, Office B on Tuesday, Office C on Wednesday, and maybe a 10-mile drive, but they're in different sites each day. Each of those sites would have a dedicated server to that practice and an ultrasound machine that writes the image to that server. The workflow was at night. Those images would be archived to corporate, so we would have a job that would archive all that data back to corporate, so we would have a copy of it secure. But the challenge still is, if the doctor's at a different site on Tuesday, how does he read the study that he saw on Monday at that Monday site, or at home, or telehealth, or, COVID if the office is closed? So I started to scratch my head and say, well, I could continue to support it in the current state and try to put some type of remote access solution in 83 locations, but that would be really difficult to manage. And the best case scenario would be, how could I take all this equipment that is in this on-prem deployment and eliminate it from the equation and centralize, to go from a centralized on-prem or decentralized scenario to a centralized location, and do that in our data center. But then again, think about what we're dealing with. We're dealing with sonograms. We're dealing with images. We're dealing with video. So now you're telling me that I'm going to take a server that's sitting 20 feet away from the physician's workstation, and I'm going to rip it out of their office, and I'm going to centralize it all the way in a data center 2,000 miles away, and this is going to work? So we had a big question, and the way we decided to do it was, let's do this POC. So we got the stakeholders together, and we thought, well, what's going to happen? Let's just try it. What does it hurt to try it? And we had concerns. So first of all, we were smart, and we realized that connectivity and bandwidth was going to be one of the most critical things here. So we'd already embarked on an SD-WAN deployment. So we knew that that would be key to the success. So we weren't even going to consider this in a practice where we hadn't deployed SD-WAN yet. So we chose a practice where we deployed our SD-WAN solution so we have the best connectivity possible. And then we decided to try this concept of virtualizing it. And we knew there was going to be a lag. And we knew, okay, what happens when you take this image and you put it, halfway across the country and you present it through a remote session? So we tried this POC, and we went back and forth. We tried to get help from the PACS vendor, and we tried to get help from, I'll say the solution, we used Citrix. So we partnered with Citrix on this, and we brought it into this POC. And what we found is very interesting. And I think, again, the lessons learned here is the workflow, is understanding the workflow. So when the sonogram is written, if you look at what the doctor does, they play the clip, the cine clip back, and it shows, of course, we've all seen a video of a sonogram. It shows the baby in the womb, and what does happen is when it plays the first time, there's a noticeable, maybe 1 to 2 second delay, which is expected since it's no longer 20 feet away and it's 2,000 feet away and it's doing this all remote. But what's interesting about it is the doctor will look at that cine clip 2, 3, 4, 5 times because he needs to repeat it to see if there's any anomalies. And what we found is after it plays the first time, it caches the image and then it plays it in real time subsequent times. So there is absolutely no delay on the second, third, fourth play of that. And what we were able to actually demonstrate to the doctors, and to our surprise, they said, I will gladly take a 1 to 2 second delay in the initial playback to be able to access this data remotely from anywhere at any time from any site. So it was really an eye-opener for us. It was a great partnership between the PACS team and the IT team. So I kind of want to go on to a little bit, how did we choose Nutanix? So again, outdated infrastructure. So in the field, not only were all of these physical on-prem servers, trying to manage keeping them all up to date, with the OS patching, the OS versions, hardware refresh, all that was challenging. And what we wanted to do was move to Nutanix so we wouldn't have to do that. Nutanix offered us the flexibility with the hyper-converged solution to be able to grow when we need to. So if we have a big acquisition, I could add 1 node. If we have to send more doctors home for COVID, I could add nodes to support the workload instead of the monolithic buy where you're buying the 3-tier architecture and have to plan for 5 years out. Some of the things that we were able to do is we were obviously, like every company, under cost considerations. So we didn't just have a blank check, even though the remote access was very important. We needed to look at what could we save by doing this. And what we found is we were able to eliminate, so instead of having a server for each of the 5 locations that the doctor would visit, we could have one for that hub and spoke type deployment. And just by providing that one server, we were able to reduce application licensing. So fewer Microsoft licenses to pay for, fewer antivirus licenses to pay for, fewer application, the actual imaging application licenses to pay for. So that actually annualized in our example here, we were able to save $500,000 in just the application costs alone. Then we looked at, sadly, all of our servers were running Windows 2008, and we were looking at a good 2 years to be able to replace all those servers, and having to pay extended support from Microsoft because of the delay, and having to fly a team to each location to spend a week there to deploy the hardware. The slower way of doing it. How could we do it quick and virtualize it and centralize it with Nutanix versus the old way of sending teams on site? We were able to save another $640,000 just in the extended support costs we would have owed Microsoft. And then the last bullet, just the reduction of the physical servers that we could decommission. So we were actually able to realize cost savings, which really helped sell the project. I think it would have sold on its own because of the option to be able to have the remote access and the feedback that we got from the doctors, but having the cost savings really helped us sell this to our executive team. So again, I thought a picture would be worth 1,000 words. So again, trying to take what Karen was showing in the slides before, this was a little picture here of a mobile sonogram device. And like she said, 400 of those throughout the company, connecting to 83 physical servers. We also used the same for telemedicine, and we had 75 of those. And those were all in a local, what we called decentralized type deployment. So we were able to eliminate the physical server in the middle and switch through the SD-WAN connections to our data center using, believe it or not, we could support all of that with 6 Nutanix nodes, and we were able to create 26 virtual servers to support the applications in the field. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So some of the value and key benefits we realized from this deployment. It enabled a nationwide telehealth capability for our clinicians, and it actually increased clinician satisfaction. We were able to deploy, and these were some real numbers, and I thought they would help resonate with the audience today. Because we had the flexibility and we weren't tied to the physical infrastructure at the sites anymore, we could take a telehealth deployment down from 4 weeks to 1 to 2 days. When we have new acquisitions, a typical 16-week turnaround time for an acquisition, we could cut that in half to 8 weeks. And then organic growth, we were looking at least a 6-week lead time before, which we could cut down to 1 to 2 weeks. So we were really able to realize some gains as an organization on efficiencies that helped. Of course, reducing the tech debt and the ROI was a big benefit for us as well. One of the things, again, I thought would be helpful to share with the group today, lessons learned. Lessons learned are always important. The partnership was awesome, but we actually went back and actually surveyed the sites after we deployed the SD-WAN and the remote solution to find out what they really thought of it. And the surveys were really eye-opening. Even though we thought we might have hit it out of the park, sometimes there's training that you'll need to do, or sometimes there's tweaks that you can make. So, getting that feedback from them initially, and then even the follow-up feedback through the surveys was something that was very helpful for us. And with that, I'd like to open the floor up to questions on our deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leah, Karen, and Tim for that great presentation. And we will now begin today's question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A chat box on your webinar console. And so let's dig in here and see what we have. The first question we'll take is the attendee asks, what has been your user response to this virtualization work? And perhaps can you expand a bit about the key benefits actually realized?
Yeah, this is Karen. I'll take this one. I wanted to bring it back to this slide. Truly, the biggest pain point was that our perinatologists, let's say there's 26 main practices trying to cover 83 offices alone. Their databases were disparate. They had to have a physical server server at each one of their locations. So one practice might have had their patient's OB record, a 9-month record spread across 8 servers. Not a very good database when you're trying to graph OB cases. This allowed us to pull their disparate databases into one patient database. So when that mom was in the hospital delivering, they have one place to log into instead of looking for her across 8. Again, part of this was our tech debt, and the vendor that we had that did not support, was not web-based and did not support combining databases. It truly, then you compound the statement or the issue with their trying to support outreach, very far away locations, and telehealth. More and more, because of the shortage of MFM physicians, hospitals, large IDNs, wanting our MFMs to cover the high-risk pregnancies. So that store-forward telehealth, we were able to do more readily so that when it was 2 a.m. and the physician is at home, they can now log in through Citrix on their personal computer, where before they had to have a Mednax device with a Mednax VPN to get to their physical server. And Tim talks about performance, knowing that maybe initially there's a lag, prior to serving this up through Citrix, on the virtualized infrastructure, they were remote desktop accessing a locally installed client on a terminal server. So not only did we have a physical PAC server, we had a terminal server so that we could put the thick client on. So physicians, if they had a Mednax device and were on our VPN, could, RDP, remote desktop in, painful to try to look at imaging across a remote desktop. The speed to deployment, we recently are working with, again, a large IDN. They want us to cover 30 of their outlying facilities, Mednax physicians reading their images. So we're not going to tie this to one practice, San Jose reading for hospitals in their market. We're now able to, in 2 weeks time frame, spin up a national instance of our PACs so that from these 30 facilities at any time, day or night, they could be feeding studies in. And our physicians, no matter if you're located in Nashville or in California, the assigned physician can log into the PACs and read from wherever they might be in the world on any device. So physician experience, to Tim's statement, about halfway through we surveyed our end users. The remote access alone, the scores went through the roof. We knew they would. We sort of set ourselves up for success here, but we did score. We're still working through that, the perfect model for performance. We're doing sort of a load balancing in the Citrix end so that, we're not spinning a virtual desktop up for each clinician. Rather, multiple clinicians are accessing the client through the day on the same Citrix VM or client VM. So we're reducing that load balancing to try to improve the performance even more, so that we didn't just deploy it and stop there. We certainly asked the question.
Thank you so much for digging in on that, Karen. Go ahead, Tim.
If I could jump in, so just to we wanted to focus on this PACS for the presentation today, but I want to field a question that came in: is this only for PACS and only for imaging? So I almost want to use the analogy from the movie Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. So what we found is we were not new to Citrix and to virtualization, but obviously this use case never been done that I'm aware of, that a PACS, a sonogram could be done remotely. So that was a challenge for us. But, COVID hit during this whole thing, and that changed everybody's world. So we started leveraging, growing our Nutanix footprint, and thankfully we could do it so granularly and so quickly that we started deploying VDIs for doctors in a clinical setting that were outside of PACS. Where our entire workforce, we were able to, from our revenue and collections, administration, all of that stuff we're able to deploy using VDI. So we continued to leverage the solution. This was just a very interesting use case about how we were able to take and completely centralize a solution that even the PACS vendor had never seen done before, and make it work. So yeah, certainly we've used the Nutanix platform to continue to grow within the organization and find more use cases beyond just the PACS. In fact, PACS is maybe 25% of the use case now, and there's 75% in other areas.
Appreciate you sharing those details with us, Tim. The next audience question I want to jump to is the attendee asks, what has been the reaction from your PACS vendor, and are they encouraged by the performance and financial results?
I will take that one also. I own that vendor relationship. Mednax is their largest customer on the MFM side. They were very open. They worked with us, including their development end, had to help us at times get the performance that we wanted to get. They could not give us direction on what their VM requirements were. We had to just take their physical server requirements and retrofit using what we knew. But they worked hand in hand, because then they absolutely come to us on behalf of other customers, always asking if we can share our story and or help the customer. Financially, I don't think they've delved into that as much. They know that it does mean we're purchasing less licenses for them. Because before, I had to have concurrent user licenses and modality inputs very redundantly on the multiple physical servers that now can be shared more broadly on the virtual. And then even lastly, I'll share this just on my end. Those of you out there, vendors are always going to throw very high specs at you. The one thing I love trying to manage a vendor and support is that peek into the virtual infrastructure where how are your processors being used? How is the memory running? If we had some interface issues with our vendor and they wanted us to throw like 32 more gigs of RAM at the server, and I'm like, no, because I could show them graphs of points in time or averages that we weren't even using 25% of the 32 gigs we had. So they're like, oh, never mind. So it's really, from a financial aspect, a lot of benefits have come to us at Mednax. And they've been fine with that. They know that, we've been able to actually reallocate licenses instead of buying new.
Yeah, and if I could just add a few things there, we really did push the vendor a lot. Being one of their larger customers helped. We tested GPU acceleration, to see if that would make a difference, and we had a lot of challenges with that, so we kind of gave up on that. We pushed Citrix. We really pushed them to help us figure out the correct settings and optimize it. But one of the things I love the most about Karen's statement, remember, Karen's a clinical person. She's on the clinical side. I'm the IT guy. And as IT people, we're always challenged from our business users for more resources, more resources, more resources. What we did was we opened up. I said, I'm going to be fully transparent with Karen and her team, give them access to the graphs. Well, the vendor says we need this, Tim. I need this much, this much, this much. And I said, okay, let's give it and let's look at it. And we would look at Prison Central, and we would look at the graphs and look at the CPU usage over time. And the numbers don't lie. And I would say, Karen, I think you could cut this by 50%. What do you think? So we did trial and error on the first couple sites. And like Karen said, she had my trust and the numbers didn't lie. And we cut it by 50% and didn't see any degradation in performance from the end user. So that, again, if I could emphasize that partnership between the two teams and that working relationship, because that that helped us size it right for the rest of the deployments and really gain another financial gain we didn't even realize we would have by just being able to right size it, because the vendor wasn't used to a virtualized world and being able to leverage the resources and add and delete resources on the fly.
Thank you so much for both of you weighing in there. Tim, I'm going to throw this next question your way. So the attendee asks, are you using VMware, Nutanix proprietary hypervisor, Acropolis?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad somebody actually asked that. So again, we went round and round. We were relatively new to Nutanix. We did a boot camp. So, we went to .next before we even were a customer. We really liked the hypervisor, but we were a little nervous because we were a VMware shop. But the numbers made sense to kind of to consider embracing the Nutanix hypervisor, Acropolis, and we did. We did not use VMware. So we deviated from our norm for our data center and for our Citrix platform, and for this PAC solution, we went all in. We were using the Acropolis hypervisor with Citrix on the back end and are very pleased with the solution.
Thank you for sharing that, Tim. We've really had a ton of great questions come in. Really appreciate all this engagement from our attendees today. The next one we'll take is, Karen, I'm going to throw this one your way. You mentioned serving underserved markets. What challenges with broadband, if any, have you experienced in rural areas, and how have you managed those?
Oh, yeah. I know it's easy to say the words and how much we can serve these markets. And to very quickly, I also have responsibility for the cardiology PACS, which tends to be, it's a different platform. It is web-based, also on Nutanix. So it's in our data center, but it's serving all of our cardiology practices. Just real quick segue, we're in the middle of RFP and a replacement of our other PACS vendor, a thick client server vendor. I know like our current MFM solution really is not what we should be doing, but this Nutanix gave us a good bridge gap till we get to a web-based enterprise MFM solution. That said, and that's why it ties into this, broadband connectivity, we have this both in this solution for MFM and in cardiology, and we've really been able to solve through that with sometimes we deploy even a Cradlepoint, a Comcast Cradlepoint, to travel with the ultrasound. So they're literally doing it through, that mobile hotspot on steroids with, the best, Wi-Fi or cellular they can get. And in those cases, about the only way you can get images you can't really get them over the wire. You've got to use your cloud partner. So we do have cloud sharing, that we have our cloud gateway there at point of care. They are getting up to the cloud, and then the cloud taking some more time. It might take 10 minutes to get that study down to that VM server.
Thank you for tackling that, Karen. And this next attendee question, throwing it your way again, Karen, also. So the attendee asked, were you able to communicate efficiently with outside providers not on the remote servers, for folks who sought care? So
that is a bit of a challenge. Mednax health solution providers, usually, the business is coming to us, somebody's looking for MFM, and or we have a sales team that is out there finding the business too. Some of our NICUs are our lead in to getting the office-based practices through acquisition. Some of these remote providers that need our specialized care, it's usually clinician to clinician knows there's a need. So there might be an OB/GYN office, or it might be an external hospital facility. The challenge is always connecting their IT and PACS infrastructure team with our IT and PACS infrastructure team to then solve what we're trying to do. So long story short, it's a clinically driven need that these remote sites need our help reading these studies. It's our physicians, it's Mednax owned practices and physicians that then are reading on our PACS. It has had the side benefit of we do bring on surgeons, for example, hospitalists, other people that might not work for Mednax. We can now onboard them as external contractors to give them access to our PACS just for seeing our studies at point of, if they're doing surgery or if they're delivering that mom at the hospital. Through Citrix, this has made it much easier for them to just log on and get into our PACS without again, having to go through VPN, et cetera.
Some important points there, Karen. Thank you so much for tackling that one. And I think it would be great to get Karen and Tim, both of you, to respond to this next question. Perhaps, Karen, you can start us off, and then, Tim, you can share your thoughts as well. So the attendee asks, how easy is it to convert from a current PACS system to your system?
For me, I'm going to say if you have the right partnerships, it's not easy, but it's doable. I mean, it took to, number one, had to have leadership buy-in to. So it's that partnership of making sure you're putting together the business case for, spending time to do this. And it does need to be what can be often a challenging IT department, opening their, eyes and ears to listen to what the pain points are of the clinician and working cohesively with whoever owns that PACS relationship and the vendor to make sure that it's well understood. So you need IT, you need the PACS admin type person and the clinicians, and then the vendor buy-in too. And Tim?
Yeah, just to elaborate a little on that. So we didn't really convert. It's not like we changed PACS vendors. It's the same PACS vendor, and honestly, to the doctor and to the end user, it's really transparent to them. Do they really know that the server was 20 feet down the hall in a closet in their little practice, or whether the server's 2,000 miles away in a data center? Of course, we told them, and they did know that. But from the way they access it in their workflow, it's 100% the same, except we added that flexibility for them to be able to access it remotely at any time. So from the IT side of the house, standing up a server as a VM versus standing up a physical server, the steps to install the application and configure the application and all on the PACS side are pretty much all the same. Certainly there were some complexities in now moving to virtual and supporting it through Citrix, but we worked through those, and it wasn't too bad.
Great. I appreciate you both weighing in on that one. Tim, I'm going to throw this next one your way. So the attendee asks, when switching from a current PACS system to your system, how are all the archived images converted to your system?
Boy, we got some excellent questions from the audience today. That's a challenge because we have literally, half a petabyte worth of archived images. There's a substantial number of them. So again, because we didn't really change the actual PACS vendor, the archive solution stayed the same. Karen, do you want to elaborate on that a little?
Yes, great question. Again, and I am sure that the gentleman asking the question knows this from what he's hearing about our PACS system currently. As I'm deprecating, 83 physical servers in the field, our vendor, our current archiving system would have meant I had to keep each of those servers alive just to reach in and find those archived images because it's a direct path to those archived images. That's why part and parcel of Nutanix, and we actually did that, cohesively, we switched to a DICOM cloud archive vendor, migrated their data to the cloud. So now through number one, their prefetch, they're pushing those images down to now this new server. And number two, if it's not a scheduled patient and the prior studies aren't being pushed down for prefetch, they, at least now a clinician only has to log into the DICOM Cloud Archive, find their patient, and if they want it in their server, pull it down. So that was challenging. Challenging if you don't have it. Yeah, go ahead.
And let me try to elaborate a little bit on that too. So with the current solution, or prior to moving to the Nutanix and Citrix solution, the on-prem server, the local on-prem server in each of the practices would store data from anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And 9 months, obviously, of a pregnancy, so you can understand why the significance of that number is there. And the reason for keeping this data local, or what we would call hot, was because the doctor wanted real-time access to it. Every night that data would go to an archive in our data center, but we would always, so we'd keep actually multiple copies. We keep 3 copies, a copy local at the practice for 9 to 12 months, and then a copy at our primary data center and a copy at our secondary data center. So we had data all over the place, right? So then we moved to this virtual solution where the data was all in the data center. So that ratio that we have for what we call the hot, the 9 to 12 months, we're honestly still playing with that and saying, hey, if it's all in the data center, do we even need this 9 to 12 months? Because it's just duplicating the data over and over and over again. So we're looking at ways to cut that down. But what I loved, again, the partnership between the PACS team and the IT team is what can we do better? So keeping all of this data on-prem in my data center, 500 terabytes of it is a lot. So we went out and kind of on the success of this project to figure out, is there a better way to store the PACS data? And what Karen was referring to is we found a partner that will eventually take all that data that we have in our on-prem, and we're just now embarking on that, and move it to a cloud solution. So it will never even point to our data center. It will point straight up to a cloud for all that legacy archive data for 18 years plus 7 for the year of maturity for these records that have to stay around forever and ever and ever. So I hope that clarified a little on that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you both weighing in there. There's some great questions we've had today, and that partnership piece is just such an important theme that keeps reemerging throughout this conversation. So the next question, Tim, I'm going to throw your way as well. The attendee asked, does your telemedicine services work on Apple Imac computers, or do you only support Microsoft systems?
I'll even start the first part of that. Yeah, traditionally, the client, if we hadn't moved to this, then we were limited to Microsoft OS. Because we're now serving this through Citrix, yes, it works on Apple Macintosh I.
Correct. So yeah, because we're using Citrix, and Citrix actually has a plugin for Apple, for iPad, for everything, really any client, anywhere, any device. Yes, you could use this for that. So that's not a limitation, which is nice. And believe me, we have asks for that, so I can understand where the question's coming from.
Yeah, and it actually, people are now definitely, even on iPhone and Android, they're able to access all of this. So.
Well, I appreciate you both, giving some clarity there. Karen, I'm going to throw this next one your way. So did you include a privacy attorney or privacy team to consider privacy by design when creating your design?
The benefit of Mednax, and we probably were remiss when I named some of the teams that would be needed, but absolutely, pretty much everything we do, as you can imagine, is in, lockstep with our security department and with compliance, to departments that weigh in on like every new model, from DICOM cloud archiving to ownership of data. We acquire practices, and we typically take ownership of their records, the patient records. But unfortunately, we also have practices that disintegrate. So everything we do, we've got to, do it in mind with decoupling all of that data, every bit of that patient's data, should that individual practice leave, or even one site of that practice, and be taken over by a hospital, for example. So, yep, lockstep with those groups.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. Go ahead, Tim.
And I would add, again, one of the, to me, the drivers of removing the equipment from the practice, God forbid somebody break into a practice and steal that server. Thankfully it's never happened, but the chances of them breaking into a secure data center that's like a fortress to steal one of my Nutanix servers is a lot slimmer than the possibility of someone breaking into a practice, and if they really wanted to be malicious, walking off with that server and then trying to breach it. Even though everything is still encrypted, I just feel like when there's no real equipment on-prem in that local office and it's all in a secure data center, I feel like our level of security is much greater, much higher.
Absolutely, that definitely makes sense. This next question, Karen, you can start us off as well. The attendee asked, can you tell us a little about the labor employee impact of the changes and how you manage a virtual workforce?
Sure, and then I'm definitely giving part of this back to Tim. I'll do it as far as my workforce. You know, I have a team of total of 10 employees that support PACS, from deployment to support to, you know, decommissioning aging servers, and a lot of their work before I had to rely on them traveling to sites to upgrade servers or to do an implementation. Now I can keep the technical team home-based. We're all a remote workforce. We're scattered throughout the United States and always have been, actually. They traveled from where they needed to. With Nutanix, I can now keep the IT side behind. There's really nothing for them to do on-prem. We're all very educated at the ultrasound systems and doing that. I still send my clinical team out to be that primary trainer, the workflow. We're integrated with our EMR. I didn't even talk about the fact that my 83 servers each had 5 interface channels to our EMR that is sitting in our data center. So now I only have to handle 26 servers with these channels. So all of those points of failure, and then again, often what required travel, I can now keep half the team home. I'm going to give the rest to Tim because there's a big story that there's not time to get into, Mednax in general, and what COVID brought to the remote workforce and what he's been able to do.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that we've had such excellent questions from the audience. We wanted this to be, a dialogue and not just a presentation with slides that took the entire hour. So excellent questions coming from the audience, and we could have done a whole talk just on remote work. So that the questions are the same that everyone's faced, is how are we now all supporting remote work in our industries? That was a big one for us. When COVID hit, it was not a model that we'd really embraced before, and it's challenging. You know, we've leveraged beyond just this PACS solution, we've leveraged VDI, so we're a big proponent of VDI, but even that, again, what we size these VDIs for with our remote force, what we thought they were going to do and what they're actually doing are a little bit different. So we sized them, actually, I'll be honest, we undersized the VDIs. We thought an average task worker would be doing, they're going to do basic email and Excel all day long. That's what they told us, so we sized a VDI for that. And what we realized is now that they're remote and they don't have the conference room five doors down to meet, guess what? They're using Teams to meet. And guess what? They're using Teams with video to meet. And guess what? Demand that puts through your VDI and through your backend to support all that. So there's been those challenges to meet the demand, because the demand keeps growing and growing. The challenges that we've all faced. How do you deal with, people who aren't very technical and don't understand a wireless connection versus a wired, and how important the bandwidth is and the connectivity. So having tools that can help, pinpoint where your actual problem is. Oh, they're calling and complaining all the time. Well, look, is it in the data center the problem, or is it at their endpoint? And having tools that can help you manage and pinpoint exactly where the problem is. Oh, it's their endpoint. Is certainly helpful for us. But it's something I think everybody's starting to learn as we've all shifted to supporting remote workers.
Absolutely. I definitely appreciate both of you, talking about this experience. I think it's been a wonderful dialogue. Tim, as you mentioned, we've had so many great questions come in, and we're going to keep rolling. So Karen, I'm going to throw this next one your way. The attendee asks, what is your experience with vascular, arterial, and venous, and general ultrasound studies, thyroid, abdomen, pelvic, soft tissue?
Yeah, I wanted to, and hope we'd get to this quick question. It definitely, 2 of our MFM practices have one of their locations that is focused on general radiology. We often forget about those 2 little guys out there. One is a very busy practice, so they're using the same platform for all of general rad, including arterial. And I still, I've been in the PACS business for a lot of years. And once you solve the transfer of cardiology, you've got it nailed. And then even this unique platform, we were able to ensure that the fetal echoes that our MFMs are doing, a lot of cine clips, a lot of really long, big cine clips, and we're able to handle that through this. So I think this worked well for general rad, where generally the studies are smaller by default.
Thank you for tackling that one quickly. Karen, I'm going to throw this next one your way too. So the attendee asked, how is data shared with external partners through HIT exchanges?
You know, I don't want to even say like word du jour, you know, HIT exchanges. When I left Fuji like 8 years ago, I would have thought we would have been into, you know, health information exchanges much more by now. I think it's a long time coming. We are not getting asked for that a lot, and when we do, we're trying to do it more EMR to EMR. You know, our next gen is our EMR, and they support the care, the continuum of care quality network. And so if the other EMR, external EMR, and ourselves can, you know, connect to that, that's our preference for sharing all data. But we find that there's very little out there that are ready to support health information technology, exchange of information.
Gotcha. Appreciate that, Karen. And then, Tim, why don't you grab this one? So the attendee asked, what was the impact on IT support?
Man, another
you
good
could
question.
Laugh, Tim.
It was a lot. Karen's team did put a lot of demands on the IT team. You know, it's something new, so we had to kind of. She's challenging, you know, that they're the front line for us. So we had to really, you know, jump whenever there was an issue. We had to be nimble and be responsive as possible. You know, it's hard when you completely do something new from scratch, but I think we've worked through, you know, those issues and are kind of now at a more stable state. So, you know, it ebbs and flows, but I think in the end, the big question is, in the end, I think it will help in overall reduce hours that we've spent. You know, it just logically, you know, maintaining 56 or 86 or whatever the number of physical servers remotely in the field was to versus 6 servers in a data center that have VMs on them. So it certainly will minimize the upgrade process and things like that. So there's trade-offs. Certainly in the beginning, you know, making sure we got this right, there was a lot of all hands on deck and a lot of hours spent to get it right. But yeah, I think we're in a good space now.
Lastly, I think this folds it right back into that partnership, because when we as a PACS team, for lack of a better term, I hate to dummy them down like that, but as a PACS team, we were frontline to our clinicians. So we were used to managing everything ourselves. We didn't need to reach out. We had on-prem services. We weren't as reliant on the network team. It is a culture change for those internal, often way behind the scenes people like Tim's team, to realize it's not a PACS team fire drill, it's a clinician fire drill when they can't work. So they just get more involved in the daily fire drill. So that's sort of a paradigm shift to them.
Thank you both for tackling it, and thank all our attendees once again for some great questions. We are coming up to the end of our time, so this will be our last question. So Tim and Karen would love both of your perspectives here. So our final question is, what do you see as future usage changes and challenges?
From a pure PACS perspective, you know, future usage changes, we have to get away from 26 VM servers required. You know, we need to switch to a true enterprise solution, because as you can imagine, we have our own, you know, Mednax data warehouse. And now we've got to log into multiple and pull data from all of these disparate servers. So that's definitely a future change. Once I get, you know, cardiology up and running, have to look at what we're doing for MFM. And Tim, maybe you know some future challenges. Continuing to support you.
So, you know, I always like to push the edge a little bit, and, you know, we kind of tried to illustrate that we went from a physical server on-prem now to a server in my data center, physically in my data center, right? And we did that because the images and the archives were in the data center. Well, like I said, we're embarking on a project right now to take all those images and our archive files and put them in the cloud. So my next logical step, and this is where it's wonderful to have Nutanix as a partner, I want to move those physical servers I have in my data center to Azure and partner with Nutanix to make that seamlessly happen. So then I completely have nothing in the data. If all my archives are in the cloud anyway, it just makes sense logically to have the servers that present the data up in the cloud too. So, you know, I think, again, we're only a year, not even a full year into this evolution. So I think it's exciting to see. I think once we finish our migration to the PACS images all being stored, the archives in the cloud, we'll look at piloting, again, another use case. Could we actually put this Nutanix server in the cloud somewhere instead of on-prem and serve this, you know, same experiencing up? And will it even be better? Will we be able to cut down on latency? Will we add latency? So I think we'll be back at the POC table again, but it's exciting. It's really exciting to see how we can keep propelling ourselves forward with the technology and partnering with the right companies.
Some great points to close on. Karen, Tim, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I want to thank Leah as well, and Nutanix for sponsoring today's webinar. To learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon.